Hi everyone, it is Nick Tarr, and for our presentation in ethics, I'm going to be presenting on working with the military population, both veterans and current active enlisted within the military. There's a couple reasons why I chose to have this be a part of the ethical presentation that we've all been working on. I have a lot of people within my own family who have served within the United States military, branching between Army, Marines, Navy, and then I also work personally with a lot of those at my own job, those individuals who have served in the military. Again, both Army, Marines. One of my close friends who lives directly across the street from me actually just recently got home from his training to be a part of the Army. So even though I myself am not a part of the armed services, a lot of the individuals who I like to call friends and family are still either active or retired from the military. So this has all been a very big part of my life, and I thought it would just be really nice to explore some of the ethical measures behind working with those who are in this population. Current demographics of the United States military. Currently, active duty personnel comprises 1.3 million men and women. A little bit about the active duty breakdown. It is down from the 2000-2008 general census. This is coming from the 2020 census. I believe it said it was around 1.8 million to 1.9 million. So it is down a little bit. Gender breakdown, women represent upwards of 20% of all branches, both commissioned officers and enlisted personnel. So they are roughly around 20% of each of the branches that make up the United States military. Age breakdown, those who are enlisted active duty personnel range between 17 and 24 years old. And then the most commissioned officers are between the ages of 25 to 34. A little bit of general information. The difference between active duty or enlisted and commissioned officers. Enlisted are the individuals who have the specific specialities that they're working for in the United States military. Commissioned officers are the people who oversee the enlisted people with those specialities. So commissioned, bosses, enlisted, employees. Good general way to kind of, I guess, think about that in the loosest civilian terms possible. Little bit continued demographics here. The Army makes up the largest portion of any active duty personnel by 35%, and Coast Guard represents the smallest of the United States military with only 3%. A little bit of veteran demographics. So there's currently 18 million United States veterans according to the 2020 census. 9% of those veterans are women, and the median age for veterans right now is around 65 years old. So in terms of practices and theory practices when it comes to working with both active duty and veterans, because a lot of these are kind of interchangeable because of the experiences that they've all have working with the military population, it's important to consider evidence-based approaches. And we want to use evidence-based psychotherapies because they're goal-oriented, they're time-limited, and they develop lasting benefits, and because they've been tried and tested. Individuals know that working with this specific population, this form of therapy is going to work best when it comes to working with a member of the Army, of the Marines, someone who has served overseas, someone who has seen the type of war and other things that come with working in the United States military. Therapy practice continued. Some of the therapies here that work well based off of information coming from the Department of Defense and some other resources is interpersonal therapy. So when we look at interpersonal therapy, we are looking to improve mood by supporting positive relationships. And you will see a lot of the therapies that we talk about when it comes to working with military personnel, both active and veteran, has to deal with relationships and how they are working with others outside of that military perspective. So interpersonal therapy, improving mood by supporting positive relationships, and we're looking at how positive relationships can be caused by life changes. Cognitive processing therapy, CBT, decreasing symptoms specifically of PTSD by exploring relationships between thought and emotion. So how our thoughts are tied into emotions, similar to cognitive behavioral therapy, how our thoughts are tied into our behaviors. With cognitive processing therapy, we're working to understand how thoughts are tied with emotions and how we think about emotions and how like our thought processes make us feel when we think about specific events, specific people, especially with those who have served in the United States military, how those specific memories, flashbacks, whatever it might be, make it elicit an emotional response out of us. Social skills training. This one is generally straightforward. A lot of times when we have individuals who come from the United States military, they are very ingrained when it comes to their social skills and like the social aspect and structure of the United States military. It's very rigid. So kind of getting back into the civilian livelihood when we work with veterans and how they can further develop their social skills when working with people in the civilian world. That communication aspect, that relationship building aspect, everything in between to help their transition either back into civilian life or continuing through the military as easier and less stressful as possible. And motivational enhancement therapy, or MET, strength and motivation for change. My apologies. How motivated are we to elicit change in ourselves? How motivated are we to work on ourselves and to make sure that we are putting the effort in to get the change that we want to see? That's what MET works with, and we would work with the military population to see the amount of change that they have, that they want to see for themselves, based on primarily with veterans and them coming out of active duty service and everything like that. So now we're moving into some of the ethical considerations, guidelines, and principles and practices when it comes to working with active duty personnel and veterans. And so a lot of this we'll see is tied into our own APA format, but it also is tied in from the own military laws and regulations that we see coming from the Department of Defense. So unlike some of our practices, they utilize both. The military guidelines and laws that the Department of Defense and ultimately the United States government sets out, but also when it comes to working in a therapeutic standpoint, also what the APA's Code of Ethics puts out for us as well. The first point that I kind of wanted to touch on was that of confidentiality, and how it's a little bit different from our understanding of confidentiality, where the client rights are pretty protected here in the civilian world. We go through very hard practices and procedures when it comes to protecting client information, whether that be through files, reporting, talking with other individuals. A couple weeks ago, we had the discussion post regarding the release of client information in a more public setting. That was not the therapeutic environment that it was supposed to be covered in. When it comes to confidentiality, while those rules still apply with members of the United States military, specifically those who are active, it's not as strict as we might see. So there's really no formal confidentiality within the military. And when I say that, I mean military psychologists. So those who are drafted with the United States military are required to disclose any information about a specific individual that they might be working with upon request. So if you have someone who either outranks you or outranks that individual who is requesting information about them regarding mental health, personal information, session notes, or anything like that, the individual who is in the psychological standpoint and that therapy standpoint is going to be required to hand them over. This is done for a variety of reasons. One, to make sure that that individual is still psychologically sound enough to serve, specifically if we come into the aspect of deployment. Are they in the right mental state to be deployed away from their family and everything like this, or are they going to be a little bit of a liability. So that's why there's really no formal confidentiality in the United States military for aspects such as that. When we look at specific Department of Defense directives, specifically 6490.1 and 6490.4, both drafted in 1997, they now allow for the officer to know the reason for the referral to psychological services. So before 1997, before any of this, you could be referred to a psychological service or a specific therapist without reasoning behind it. If someone who was your superior said you're going to go talk to a therapist, they were not required to disclose the reason that they thought you should go talk to that therapist. You would just go because it was an order. Now these individuals also have to right to a second opinion. So if they don't like the therapist that they're sent to see, they can go talk to someone else, and the ability to speak with their clergy or congressman regarding being sent to that psychological service. So if they want to go talk to their congressman, they feel that they don't need to go talk to a therapist or see someone in a mental health capacity. They would talk to their congressman. That's now their right according to these two directives sent out by the DoD. And then we touch into the DoD need to know statute. That goes back to the topic of mental stability when it comes to being deployed, when it comes to serving in specific areas throughout the world, wherever they might be, and general overall mental health as a member of the United States military. Some further ethical considerations, and I think it's important to note on past experiences when we're working with individuals who have served in the United States military or continue to serve in the United States military. They see a lot. They have experiences that those in the civilian standpoint don't really understand, or really won't understand unless we're in those conflict zones. And for the majority of us, specifically, in our classroom that this is being presented to, unless you have served in the United States military or served in some form of law enforcement or something like that, we're not really going to see the experiences that these individuals are or have experienced. So I think it's important to realize that differentiation, and also understand that, there's a lot to learn about an individual, and that their experiences and their past is going to be different from our own. And it may not be pretty. Current symptoms, we want to consider their current symptoms that they might be experiencing, PTSD, anything like that could come and play into our role as the therapist, and also our treatment planning and our goals for the therapy sessions. We did talk about this a couple weeks ago when it came to mandated reporting and what it meant to be a mandated reporter. And same here when working with members of the military, of veterans. So we do have a responsibility to report. Now, this is going to be a little bit different. We're looking at Section 4.02 of the Ethics Code, where that mandated reporter responsibility came into play. Primarily, this has to deal with child abuse, and those types of areas. And since we're not necessarily may not be dealing with child abuse, we are dealing with those who may abuse themselves based on past experiences. So while we're looking at individuals who might be suffering from specific mental health effects, and their coping mechanism might be self-harm, we do have a mandation and requirement to report that. I myself, even though I don't work with the military population, I am a mandated reporter in Pennsylvania and in Texas. So any client that I have from those two states, or while I work in both of those states, if I have any client that comes across my caseload where they've reported abuse to themselves or abuse to others, I am a mandated reporter, and I do have to report that to the local, either law enforcement, state agency, Health and Human Services, whoever it might be for the specific county or state. And another point that I wanted to point out, topic, and when it comes to ethical considerations, and we talked about this in class as well, is the avoidance of multiple relationships. And this is interesting because this is something we typically think when we think of multiple relationships. We think of friends, families, husband, wife coming to the same therapeutic environment. But when we're working with the military, we're working with individuals who might have been on the same deployment, in the same platoon, in the same barrack. They've come to know one another. They're friends. They are, they serve together. Relationships have been built between individuals within those categories. So while it might be difficult, specifically if you are a military psychologist working in, the military area, in that same platoon, in that barrack, if you are an external civilian psychologist working with military personnel, it's important to kind of differentiate between those relationships. So working with two individuals in the same platoon from the same barrack might prove to be not only an ethical violation based on the experiences that they're telling you and the information that you're getting and giving back, but also might hinder the therapeutic relationship between you, the two individuals, between you and that client. Continuing on, we look at APA Standard 2.06. This is another point that we've talked about when it came to working in a therapeutic environment, and it's now even more important now that we are working in we're talking about military personnel and working with military personnel and the ethical considerations that come with that. A section from 2.06, psychologists refrain from activities when they know or should know that there is a substantial likelihood that their personal problems will prevent them from performing their work-related activities in a content manner. Therapists working with the military need to know the content that they will be discussing. So when it comes to working with members of the military and working with active duty and veterans, we need to understand that there's going to be things that we're discussing that are simply going to take us back a little bit, that we might not be expected to hear, that might leave a little bit of a lasting impact when we leave our office that night or when we leave the environment of that, where that therapeutic practice takes place. You know, these individuals have seen death, suffering, war fronts. They've lost individuals who they called friends. They might have lost loved ones. So discussing that in that therapeutic environment is going to leave a lasting impact on us. We're all human. We have emotions. It's going to be something that we may not want to talk about or do not like to talk about, but it's going to come up when we're working with military personnel. We talked about, you know, the importance of, you know, setting aside time for one personal self like a few weeks ago when it came to working with individuals who might have more traumatic backgrounds than we're used to. And this is a prime example right here. If we feel the need to where we're becoming overwhelmed based on what we're hearing, you know, we're finding that the conversations are becoming a little difficult to continue, we need to ask for assistance and we need to engage in a self-assessment and to see if we're experiencing any specific stressors from that work. I'm gonna swallow my pride a little bit and say I think I would also feel a little bit of stress coming from, you know, working with individuals who have been in, you know, military personnel, active war zones, anything like that, where I also might be feeling a little bit stressed out and a little bit heavy based on the information that I'm receiving and the conversations that I'll be having. It's expected. It's something that we all need to be aware of, but we also need to know that we have an ethical responsibility to know when to step aside and know when to ask for help. Because if we were to continue on with those conversations without regard to ourselves as the therapist, it could in turn even more affect the client than we would hope. Avoiding an ethical conflict. So here we are looking at standard APA 1.02, conflicts between ethics and the law. So like I said at the beginning of this presentation, when we're working with military personnel, we have to include both our APA standard code of ethics, but also the military code of ethics and the military law. And when we're working in those subjects, we want to make sure that we are not crossing lanes or not crossing wires or anything like that between the code of ethics and the law. One way for a psychologist working with the military personnel to avoid making an ethical conflict is to work within the chain of command, and specifically work within the individuals that you're supposed to report to, and to work if we're working with a requesting officer who is asking for specific information about an individual, you know, we work with them, not the person below them. We work with them. We follow military regulations as well as the APA regulations. And a lot of times, you know, in the role of a therapist working with the United States military, we are going to be asked questions regarding mental health status for when it comes to being deployed. Like I said earlier, or being stationed in a specific area, you know, if they're fit for duty. And we can give general responses for determination of deployment availability. We don't have to disclose everything that's talked about in a specific session unless it's requested. Like we said, remember, but if you're a military psychologist, that might be requested of you. But if you're not, general responses will do okay, say, you know, when it comes to the question of their deployment. Another point that I feel is extremely important that needs to be made is the understanding that the military has its own specific culture. And, ethically, we should always be concerned about, or be aware and concerned with other people's cultures when we're working with them in a specific environment. We need to understand the individuals that we're working with and understand that we're not all alike. We might be both American, but I'm not a member of the United States military. And so that specific culture is not relevant to me and my understanding of my own culture. So the United States military has its own culture. Therapists need to know and understand specific terminology that comes with that culture. Lieutenant, barracks, just general understanding of, how they talk, how they act. The understanding of specific codes, degrees that you are within the United States military, lieutenant general or, cadet, something like that. Manners and behavioral norms in the military as well. Like the example, you act and behave differently between specific uniforms. You're in your dress blues. You are formal at that point in time. You don't drink in dress blues, or you don't act a specific way. You don't wear your hats indoors. When you enter a building, any point you're in uniform, your hat comes off. Understanding those behavioral norms will help you facilitate a better therapeutic environment for yourself and for that client as well, because you have an understanding and a grasp on the specific culture that they might reflect or might adhere most to. And understanding the military's beliefs, missions, and values. A lot of times, it's pretty general when it comes to the United States military, their belief, their missions, their values, but also understanding the specific missions and values of each individual branch. The values of the Army differ a little bit from that of the Marines, and the values of the Marines differ a little bit from that of the United States Navy. So having a general understanding of each branch's values and the individual's values that serve in those branches will help you be more aware of that cultural standpoint and inevitably a more effective therapist when it comes to working with military personnel. Here are the resources that I had for the information that was provided for you throughout this presentation. And then my discussion question to everyone: what other ethical considerations do you think we need to be aware of when working with members of the armed services? How would you personally ensure that the code of ethics is enforced in your practice? And do you see any potential conflicts when working with members of this group? So more than what I had mentioned in here, multiple relationships, anything like that, what are other potential conflicts that you could see arising from ethically, from working with members of this group? Thank you everyone very much for your time. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. I know we are entering a little bit of a break week here, so happy week 7.5. It's been really nice being able to work with everyone, and I look forward to rounding out this round of classes with you.